morning, everyone. Today is Tuesday, April 26th. It's 8:35 a.m. We will call the Senate Local Government Committee to order. If everyone could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good morning, everybody. We have two bills this morning. They kind of overlap a little bit, so we'll have both authors introduce their bill, and then we'll go in with the testifiers. We'll start with Senator Anderson, Senate File 1927. Senator Anderson is online, so go ahead.
Good morning, John. Good morning, members. Appreciate the opportunity to present the Senate file this morning. Annexation has kind of been following me in my whole time in the legislature for early 90s on up to the present. I remember back in early 90s, I should say later 90s, early 2000s at Monticello Township and the city of Monticello were bickering over the city wanting to take more land from the township. It became quite a squabble because there were signs up all over that each pointing their fingers at one another to not allow one to take land for the purposes of the need that they had, and the other for the purposes of not taking land because the owners of the land were not in favor of this whole thing. That was probably a 3-year squabble that finally was gotten over. Then the end of 2010, 2011. The city of, the city of Buffalo decided that because they had parcels of land on either side of a property owner, they took a large property just east of Buffalo, and had a lot of people contacting me, asking me, how does the city have that right to take that? Well, statute has it that there are certain criteria by which a city can take property, but even if the property owner decides that they don't want to be a part of the city. So, and that leads up to kind of today, where I gotten people from Annandale area, Southside Township, where there was a concern by citizens on a lake out there, whereby part of the property that was sold to a developer wanted to have sewer and water brought in, and the property owners were against it, and yet Southside Township formed a orderly annexation agreement to have this piece of property be brought into the city of Annandale. So annexation has been kind of a history in my background, and not that you necessarily want to be in the midst of that, but it's a continual ongoing saga of who's right, who's wrong. And if you look back in years gone by, I'm thinking of even today of the situation with Russia claiming that Crimea is an island that is south of Ukraine, and they claim it as their own. And so in order really to get to Crimea, they have to go through Ukraine to get there. And so we have problems even in the larger sense of the word annexation with world situations. So Senate File 1927 is a bill dealing with the issue of annexation, mainly between townships or villages and a city, and the bill prohibits annexation of a designated area by means other than those identified in an orderly annexation agreement. It also prohibits annexation of a designated area by non-parties. This bill also modifies detachment proceedings and amends Minnesota Statute 414.0325 and many parts of that Minnesota statute. I think that without going further into a lot of detail, the basic thing that I would like to see is that we go into have an orderly annexation as our bottom line for all situations where there is a need of one party or another, whether city or village or township, to make it so that they come to an agreement, and then this is done in a means by which there's not a lot of hurt feelings and not a lot of discontent amongst the parties. So I know there's individuals who have come to testify, Mr. Chair, and I turn it over to them.
Thank you, Senator Anderson. Before we go to our testifiers, we'll have Senator Kiffmeyer introduce her bill, Senate File 1969. Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. So Senate File 1969 has to do with property rights, recognizing that you may have a city, you may have a township, but the property is owned by a property owner. And the difference, though, is what jurisdiction as far as governance that property will be a part of, whether it's the city or the township. And so the goal here is to give a voice to property owners, that when you have annexation or when you have issues that are coming up, that these property owners would have a say in regards to their own property, whether it be in a township or a city. This is a big difference to a property owner. Many times there are water, sewer, utilities, broadband, a variety of issues, taxes and so on, that are going to be impacted when a jurisdictional change might occur. And so there are really three parties: the city, the township, and then the property owner. And to date, right now, the cities are able to annex even without the agreement of a township, much less consideration of the property owner. And so what this bill does is helps to make sure that property owners themselves are able to be involved. And members, if you take a look, there are some resolutions in your packet as well that have some very good comments as well. And so I think the main thing is that we want to make sure that the property owners are a party to this process, as well as the townships, that all three would be included in when you have a change in governing jurisdiction. So, Mr. Chair, our testifiers, I think, will give great input into this, and I will leave that to them at this time so they have more time. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members.
Thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer. So I will give 15 minutes to each side that would like to speak, so that the proponents and the opponents will each start. So 15 minutes total is what we'd like to stick to so we can get through today's agenda. First on my testifier list is Jeff Kruger, Executive Director of Minnesota Association of Townships. If you can come up and introduce yourself. Senator Uyghur.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, reference was made by Senator Kiffmeyer to resolutions. Are there resolutions in the packet?
I don't believe we have any, Senator Kiffmeyer.
Okay, Mr. Chair, my apologies. I will give them to the pages to make copies and put out. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Uyghur.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Krieger.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jeff Krieger. I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Association of Townships. Also with me, I do have my General Counsel, Steve Fensky, who's going to talk more about the specifics of the legislation. I'm going to talk more about the impact to townships. Some of you may not know, I'm also a township officer. I'm in Newmarket Township in Scott County, besides being the Executive Director of the association. So I have firsthand knowledge as far as going through this type of process. Personally, just being an officer, I didn't know that we had an annexation problem in the state. Not until I actually got to Matt, when I saw that statewide, there's an issue. Good case in point, in my township, we do have orderly annexation. That's how every annexation is done. And it didn't used to be that way, but it is that way now. And so everything is petitioned by the landowner. That's how it starts. Goes to the city comes to us. And then we do have an exchange of funds, usually 3 to 5 years, of township taxes that usually paid by the developer. And then on the back end of that, we also have a detachment clause. So it stops any type of land grabs. And so if no infrastructure has been put in within 5 years, again, it goes back to the township, or the landowner. If they do choose to go back to the township, they can do that, but it all starts and ends with the landowner. A couple examples I just wanted to give, one being Stanchfield Township up in Santee County. Stanchfield is a township of about 68 people. Their near city is City of Bram. They have about 1,900 people or so. This just recently happened, I believe, in 2021, and with their 11 properties in total, but 5 were in question. As far as for the annexation, and that were being contested. With these landowners, they went to the city hearing, and voiced their opinion that they did not want to become annexed. And of course, to no avail, that they did become annexed. And the problem with that is well, many problems, but, but the biggest one is that when they looked at their property taxes, local property taxes, after they became annexed, their property taxes local-wise went from $400 to $1,800. Now, you're talking about a township where, again, 68 people, average household income is $34,000. Now, $1,200 or $1,400, can't do math, for them is a substantial amount of money. So just want to kind of bring that to your attention. Second thing is Eccles Township up in Beltrami County, city of Wilton, is this nearby city. And interesting thing about that is that Eccles has a population of 2,014 people. City of Wilton has a population of 263. Wilton does not provide any type of city services, no water, no sewer. They both contract with the city of Bemidji for their fire protection. But yet, in the recent years, Wilton is annexing property from the much larger township. And for no other reason than just increase their tax base in their city. Again, because they offer no services, no benefit whatsoever to the township residents. And the last example I wanted to give was Northern Township, again, up in Beltrami County, city of Bemidji, is their nearby city. 2005, they had an orderly annexation agreement that was established up there. What had happened there was that a resort had changed hands. There's a resort that's a half mile north of their most northern border of Bemidji. And so in ensuing of the change of hands of ownership, the septic had to be upgraded per specs of the Minnesota state law. And so when they didn't want to do that, and it did not happen, so they petitioned the city to become annexed. On its face, sounds great. Unfortunately, there are numerous homes in that half-mile range between Bemidji Township Bemidji, the city, and Northern Township, or in this resort, within Northern Township, excuse me. And so those people, again, vehemently opposed any type of annexation order. And also, when they are under an orderly annexation agreement, again, that was established back in 2005, and within that agreement, they also upgraded their septic systems. I don't know about you guys, but I do live in a township, I do have septic, and I don't know what their costs are, but I know if I were to replace my septic, it would cost me about $40,000. I don't know what they spent, but it is a ton of money. And now the city wants to annex them into their city, bring them city water and sewer. All that money that they just put into their septic was for nothing. Last thing, I just want to reiterate that we do prefer orderly annexation. We know that annexation exists. We do not oppose annexation. We know that is a normal process by what does happen. We just want to have a seat at the table. We want to make sure that it is orderly and that it is smart growth, not just growth for no reason. We had a couple of meetings with the league and also the coalition. Coalition brought up some interesting data. One of the data, some of the points that they brought up is that in the last 5 years, there are over 600 annexations that took place. And they can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe it was 280 that were orderly annexations, 340 that were forced annexations, but there are only 2 that were contested. And they will tell you, they have said, I don't know if they'll say today, but they have said that's proof that the system is working. My definition is that just because it's not contested does not mean that there are no concerns and that there are no problems with the annexation. Two things I want to highlight. Senator Anderson already brought up one of them, and that was Monticello Township versus Monticello, City of Monticello. This township was fighting it, and this was back in 2003, I believe, and the acreage in question was 11,500 acres. The other one I want to highlight is Wyoming Township. Their nearby city is Chisago City. The amount of acreage in dispute is 11,100 acres. And what's interesting about those, with the Monticello Township versus City of Monticello, even the Wright County Board signed a resolution opposing the annexation, but yet it still went through. And again, both townships fought it. At that time, there's an article in the newspaper that stated that it would cost them about $175,000 to fight that annexation. Well, that's 2003. With inflation, go up to today, that's about $275,000 in today's money. My township, Newmarket, we're the 14th largest township in the state. And our annual budget's about $1 million. So we'd be looking at spending 27.5% of our entire annual budget to fight one lawsuit. That's why we don't have contested annexations, because we just cannot afford it. Our budgets are very small. But these highlight the inequities and abuses of the current system. Last thing, I just want to bring up a historical perspective. In 1992, the coalition and the league lobbied legislature and succeeded in repealing the right of township residents to vote as to whether they should be annexed. This occurred as a result of a last-minute amendment that was slipped into that year's tax bill. I've heard from several legislators that we want peace in the valley. And peace in the valley is not going to happen between the two entities. It's that this was a legislative action that created the imbalance that we are currently living with today. And it's going to take a legislative action to restore the balance that it should be. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Krieger. Next up, we have Mr. Fenske.
Morning, Mr. Chair. I'm Steve Fenske with the Township Association. Overall, townships look at annexation as should be driven by need or landowner desire. And that's what both of these bills try to do. The very high points of SF 1927, it tries to serve need by, first of all, strengthening the orderly agreements. And Senator Anderson touched on that, Jeff touched on that. But basically, when you have a township and a city that have come to some agreement and they've started doing planning for some area, we intend that that's going to be respected. We expect that they can rely on that. The problem is that the way the law is interpreted right now, a third party can come in, another city, and take property that's already dedicated or that may already be planned for by the township and the first city. So this bill strengthens that and says during the time of that agreement, nobody can come in unilaterally. It encourages cooperation rather than encouraging unilateral action. Okay, and we have worked on that to try and make that where there's restrictions on the time length. And of course, another city can always come in and talk to the parties and they may let them in. Okay, that's one piece that 1927 does. Another is to remove 2 of the 7 annexation by ordinance powers. There are actually 7 of those powers. Many of them are based on land use, and we're not touching those. The ones that cities most often rely on, we're not touching them at all. The ones that we look at are where it doesn't have to do with development, land use, or landowner interest. And it proposes to pull out 2 of them that are based only on physical characteristics. There are not many of them, of those annexations, but when we see them, they're highly contentious because somebody just doesn't want to go. They're not looking to change anything with their property. And suddenly they're in the city, their taxes may go up. The last piece is detachment. Sometimes properties annex and it does not get developed. And it sits in the city for a very long time. And occasionally it never gets developed. We're looking to remedy that by saying after some amount of time, maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10 years, of some amount of time where it's not developing. If it hasn't been served by any new services, it's not being developed, the township would be able to take that back and put that back into the township because it remains a rural use. Those are the high points of the bill. There are other minor things in there that are consequential to those primary changes relating to roads, where they go, and payments. But those are the high points. The alternative is Senator Kiffmeyer's bill, which says we're not deciding and cities aren't deciding. It says landowners are going to decide. As we're short on time here, I think I'll leave it there with these are different approaches, hopefully to the same goal of making annexation based on need as opposed to land grab. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fenske. Next, we have Mr. Craig Johnson. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Craig Johnson. I'm with the League of Minnesota Cities. And we do appreciate the opportunity to make a few comments today. I'm going to start off, and I'm just going to kind of do a little bit of an overview. And Mr. Chair, what I'd like to do is just take a brief step back and talk about why do we have this annexation thing out there to deal with. And The reality is that we have a couple of different forms of local government in this state, city, township, at the very localist levels. And in statute and in practice, they have a defined role of what they're supposed to be doing. And cities are defined as the place where urban, suburban, and concentrated development should be occurring and the services to support them should exist. Townships have a different list. It's rural, agricultural, recreational purposes, things of that nature. So that's where the struggle comes. And when we have a community that is trying to grow, which we all know that's the goal, we want economic development, and the number of hours that the legislature has spent talking about how we need lots more houses built lots faster, well, you need a place to build them. And the developers want to build them as efficiently at the lowest cost they can, and for that purpose, they want to be on smaller lots with water and sewer, stormwater, street service, the things that you get in a city setting. And so when that kind of development is planned, it's planned right next to a city, and the city often annexes that land as part of that. And so that's where you see this coming. And it is an important part of how cities plan for growth that's responsible, both in terms of the services they need to provide for that growth to be upheld in the area, and for the other environmental planning and infrastructure planning that has to happen, whether it's roads, water, sewer service, the capacity of those systems, the school systems that need to exist if there's a large population increase. That all comes into play on this. So, in particular, there's a history on this that I want to highlight. If you look at the statute, there was a large packet of changes made in the 2006 legislative sessions. That was done through a legislative initiative that started in the House, and numerous changes were made at that time that you can look up in the statutes. I'm not going to run through them all. Once before that and once after that, there were task forces formed by the legislature. The first one had the head of alternative dispute resolution at Hamlin Law School serve as a mediator for meetings between townships and cities, lasted for the entire interim. The second one was chaired by the Assistant Chief Law Judge from the Office of Administrative Hearings, who oversees annexations. And they have a legislative report you can see that was filed in February of 2009. And in neither of those cases was a package of legislative changes recommended coming out of those. Because what became very evident is that there were very good reasons both ourselves and our township friends and allies over here have very diverse and different interests in this, and that there isn't an easy middle ground on this, but there are very good reasons for why the law has been set the way it is and the balance that exists in it. And we do not agree that there is some kind of crisis that has been going on for 30 years. We think it has been functioning, and we do think that there are cases where it has not worked well, and the hearing process has generally resolved those. I do have all of the data from the last 5 years for annexations of every kind that have happened in the state, and I would have to respectfully disagree with some of the analysis of those numbers that's been said. The opportunities the townships have had to speak out against annexations are not by going to court for a full-blown 11,000-acre contested case hearing. They are by asking for a hearing with an administrative law judge to determine if the petition being filed is appropriate for an annexation by ordinance. And they are not doing that. So they are ending up being approved without objection and without a hearing. The results, though, of those previous negotiations were that the focus was on the need for better communication. We all agree, and I think you can ask any of us, that orderly annexation is the preferred option. It's the least expensive for all the parties if townships and cities have a disagreement. Secondly, communication is the key. The property owners and the local units of government need to be talking. And so what we have focused on in those intervening years is addressing that by, in the products we put out, in the training we give our members, and I'm sure townships are doing the same thing, really push for the orderly annexations, get the orderly annexations. And so that's where our focus has been. Legislatively, we have also chosen to be cooperative. There have been several changes made to annexation law since those 2006 changes, but all of them were because cities and townships agreed to get it done. One was a change townships needed to the 120-acre petition rule. One was a change cities needed to the detachment rules and how laws and how they function. And one was a package of changes the administrative law judges brought forward in 2008 after that big change to annexation law to fix up places where those changes caused conflict. So, Mr. Chair, I would just like to end by saying we have a long history on this issue, but it is one where we need to sit down and talk to work it out. And I would differ with earlier testimony in that that has not occurred. The only discussion that has happened in the last 5 years with cities and townships is a township agenda meeting with many of you present at that meeting on a Zoom call with their agenda and us being asked what we thought of their agenda. That is not the same thing as organizations sitting down and talking about where their differences are and how to resolve them. And we have every intention of meeting with townships to do that. That has not been a request that they have been interested in right now. Don't blame them, it's a legislative session. But we do need to sit down and talk together to see where there are possibilities for us to work further. And with that, I'm going to leave the details of this information to the next testifier.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Ms. Weefel?
You could stay. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer and the rest of the committee. I am going to actually skip some of my introductory comments in light of the time, but I represent the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, and we are an organization of more than 110 cities across the state, a range of sizes. You know, the pandemic's been tough, but our cities are tougher and they continue to grow and thrive. And as Craig has explained, annexation really does play an essential role in facilitating that growth, helping to make sure that we're putting the housing in place that we need to recover, making sure that our buildings have, our businesses have the space to expand. Now, I'm going to tackle a few specific provisions of the bill, but before jumping into that, I do want to say one thing, that, you know, the word in these discussions of taking gets thrown around quite a bit. I do want to point out that taking is a very technical legal term. That's not the same as annexation. So that's a entirely different ball. I think that annexation we need to focus on, it is what is the form and appropriate form of government, as we want to, provide housing, or as we want to protect open spaces. But let's tackle the orderly annexation issue first. I often refer to it as the Midway Township issue because the case involving Midway Township is where a lot of these concerns arose. We can all agree that orderly annexation can be a great way to approach boundary changes. Who doesn't like something where we all agree? But the circumstances have to be right. They often are when a city and township can come together and agree on a reasonable path forward that facilitates common sense growth. But it doesn't work and should not be allowed to take precedence when it is used as weaponized to block annexations and not facilitate growth, and it also should not be allowed to block development that is being pushed forward by a property owner. But that's exactly what happened in the Midway Township case that has, led to this legislation. In that situation, the owners of property that was adjacent to the city of Proctor asked the city to annex them so that the property could be developed and get city services. Midway Township said, nope, you can't do that. We have an orderly annexation agreement with Duluth. But, this property, again, was bordering right on Proctor, made more sense. They were in the position to, to provide the streets, provide the sewer, that kind of thing. The Supreme Court, this case went all the way up there, and the Minnesota Supreme Court disagreed with the township and said that Midway Township and Duluth could not use their agreement to block the rights of these non-parties to that agreement. And this bill, a primary purpose of this bill would change that, and we think that's bad policy for everyone. Again, orderly annexations, when they work, they're great, but what we don't want is a situation where a township can use it to block growth and development, or where it is, again, blocking a property owner who wants to be part of that annexation. The other concern we have that doesn't get mentioned, but we see this, is that, when you enter an orderly annexation agreement, you have to agree on a sort of a price that covers the acres that will be taken. One of the things that our cities have run into, and honestly, you hear about the changes they'd like to make in law. I think this is one, we'd like to see is that there's you can use this to sort of drive up the cost of orderly annexation, because if a city is being told that the only way that this annexation can take place is if you have an orderly annexation, they've lost all of their bargaining power in that, and that sort of compensation cost no longer sort of resembles replacement of property taxes, and that's also a concern. There's other concerns in this bill. The repealer that was mentioned, this is not simply, making it taking away something that doesn't make sense for the cities. If you look at the repealer, annexation by ordinance is allowed in situations where the land is bordered on at least two sides. I mean, think about it, like the city is practically surrounding or is completely surrounding another part of the bill that they'd like to do away with. This is exactly the type of situation where annexation makes sense. It's filling in housing, it's, you've got the property here. Annexation makes sense there so you can, provide the sewer, provide the streets, provide the rest of those services. Otherwise, if you didn't allow this kind of thing, if you just sat down and think about it, you could be walking down a street and you've got township property, city property, township property, city property, septic, sewer, city water. That doesn't make a lot of sense. And so those provisions they're trying to get rid of really are common sense ways to sort of deal with how property is developing. We're also concerned about reinstituting the election requirement that the legislature got rid of 30 years ago. Again, we're concerned that this could lead to patchwork development and that it would interfere with providing city services to those who want it. So we urge rejection of that. Finally, we're also concerned about the provisions that make detachment much easier, but it really does, and I'm going to let my colleague Cap O'Rourke talk about it. If you were here of that stakeholder group we had online, earlier this spring, I think, current Representative Olson, former mayor, talked about the devastating effect that this has had on cities in Southwest Minnesota. So, these issues are not simple. Annexation, it can work. Orderly annexation is great, but sort of making these changes without sort of thinking through the bigger implications for cities, townships, and quite frankly, the state, who ends up having to come in and clean up some of these issues is important. So thank you for your time, and I'm going to cede what we have left, if we have any time left, to Cap.
Thank you, Ms. Weevil. Mr. O'Rourke. Please state your name and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I will do my best job to keep it as brief as possible. My name is Cap O'Rourke. I represent the Minnesota Association of Small Cities. We advocate on behalf of the over 705 cities who have populations under 5,000. Our biggest focus in this bill and our biggest concern is the detachment issue. As my colleagues have mentioned before, there was apparently a working group of interested parties. I would say, unfortunately, Minnesota Small Cities was not a part of that working group. I did get notes from it, but the detachment provision in this legislation is what concerns us the most. It has had and has the potential to have significant impacts on our small cities across the state and their economic development efforts and their growth efforts and how they set their budgets. The ease in which some of these properties and these land can go back to the townships is what has the greatest concern. We do know there are and there have been third-party organizations going around and trying to specifically focus on land, and that is just kind of not working with the townships or the cities, but just going around and trying to work a process to separate these properties from the municipalities, and it is causing significant concerns to our communities. So we would love to be able to continue to work along with our city colleagues and our township colleagues to have these ongoing discussions, as Mr. Johnson said, but as of yet, we have not been part of those aforementioned discussions.
Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke. Questions from members? Senator Bingham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I want to say thank you to Senator Anderson, because he's allowed me to kind of partner with him on this bill that he has. I'm not quite on as an author yet. And Senator Kiffmeyer for bringing this issue forward. I have 3 townships in my district, and this is always a topic of discussion when I go to the annual township meetings or meet with their board. There's just something that's inherently wrong when you have a big city that, or larger city, or small city, to be honest, Cap, that can just kind of grab land from a township without some sort of process. Do I think these bills are perfect? No, I like Senator Anderson's better than Senator Kiffmeyer, no offense, Madam Chair, but this needs to be addressed. There are the real issues of providing utilities, and so the opponents are not wrong in that sense. There has to be room there, and while this won't get done by the time I'm out of here, I really hope next year and through the interim, folks sit down and come up with a resolution that is not gonna probably be perfect, because I don't see how it can be, but at least palatable for folks, because both sides are bringing up really good issues, but at the heart of it, you know, you have a town that is a township for a reason, and they want to be that way, and the idea of having somebody come in and say, we're gonna help you out, and not really have buy-in from, you know, I'm the baby of the family. I don't know if you know that by maybe how I act. I'm the baby. But you have, it feels like the big brother or big sister's coming in and saying, I'm going to take it from here. And I don't really, it doesn't sit well with me, Mr. Chair. And so I hope that in the future, this committee can continue to have discussions on a resolution, and really appreciate the time that you've given to have this discussion, because it is a very important topic for those of us that have especially, I mean, there's a lot of districts that just have townships and maybe one big city, but for us that have a combination of both, it is a very dicey issue when you dig down into it. So thank you.
Thanks, Senator Bingham. Senator Newman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Like Senator Bingham, I'm not going to be here next year. So I just thought I'd share this with you in hopes that it will help as you look at this next year. In the past, I was an administrative law judge, and I presided over annexation cases. I also mediated annexation cases. This is quite a few years ago. And the same complaints, the same issues, the same problems that I presided over as an administrative law judge are now being presented in this committee hearing today in 2022. Nothing has really changed, and Senator Bingham is absolutely correct. There is a problem here. I do not believe that between the townships and the cities, they will come to an agreement. This is a legislative issue that this committee is going to have to address in some form or fashion. The issue in my mind is you've got a community that wants to grow versus property rights of somebody who lives in the township. Property rights are important. Also, the township government has the issue of the tax base being removed from them. And that affects everybody in the township, not just the affected property right or property owner. So what it really comes down to, in my mind, is the desire of a community to grow and plan and add to their tax base and have housing and all of that for that community versus the rights of the property owner and the township. And in my mind, the right of the city in terms of annexation is not superior to the property owner in the township or the township government. And therein lies the crux, in my opinion, of the problem. Is the cities, it seems to me, take a position that they have a superior right to that land. And I don't think they do. And ultimately, what we have is a situation where in terms of annexation, it's out of balance. And I think I would recommend to this committee that you take a real hard look at a bill like Senator Kiffmeyer's bill because what it's trying to do is address the fact that things are out of balance in the annexation law arena. And I understand this is an informational hearing only, but I would urge, Mr. Chairman, that you take a real hard look at this next year. It's going to be a nasty issue for you because there's never going to be an agreement, in my opinion. But through leadership, through this committee, I think you will be able to find a path forward that is fair to the property owners, to the townships, and to the cities that are all involved in this annexation problem that for years and years and years has festered. It's never gotten any better. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Newman. Anyone else? Senator Uyghur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question of the authors or perhaps research staff. Is there any guidance as to how other states have addressed similar issue?
Mr. Chair, I did not do a research of NCSL to see if that was the case, but they often have a great database for that kind of question. So unless staff has something, I do not right now.
Mr. Chair and Senator, I don't think there's a good answer because different states do this differently. Our township association's a member of a national township association. Among those township associations throughout 8 to 10 states, some townships are much like ours. You see Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, they have township systems much like ours. You go to New York, Pennsylvania, they have townships of 200,000 people. So these are different arrangements. I don't have a good answer for it. I think largely each of them is based on use. What is going to be the land use and where is that an appropriate use?
Hey, Ms. Finsky.
And Mr. Chair, I think it's interesting is many times out on the East Coast, they don't have counties either. The towns and the cities provide governance without an extra layer of governing in regards to counties. And so that means towns in that situation are often very large, and we're often, many times you see here in Minnesota too, it started with the town and then the cities came. So it isn't always one way or the other, but I find that fascinating sometimes how other states do accomplish things. So it's a great question that we can consider that, but it's also each state making their own way in these matters.
Thanks, Senator Kiffmeyer. Anyone else? Again, I want to thank everybody. Again, Senator Kiffmeyer.
Yeah, I would like to make a couple closing comments if I
Sure.
could. Okay, thank you so much. First of all, I was on a Zoom meeting, and it was a meeting. It wasn't really a work group. I was invited to a meeting, and so we had a conversation in regards to this. I do think that it would be helpful to consider a stakeholder work group legislation that would do some interim work that can oftentimes be very helpful. And that way, we can make sure that all the stakeholders, legislators are part of it. I think that would be very constructive. I do think, though, in that meeting, the general sense I got is the cities like it the way it is, and they aren't interested in any change, period. And so you can't negotiate with someone that takes that position. You just can't. And I agree with Senator Newman in regards to this. I think this is something, maybe if we had an official kind of work group that we did that we could try and make some progress in that regard, and that this really is a legislative issue. And the reason why is you have a great imbalance of power. You have cities who have more money, more resources. They have a statutory imbalance of power that weighs in on them. They have staff. You've got townships, just don't compete with that whatsoever. And then you have the property owners who would have to pay out of their own pocket. Even in my bill, they would have to pay for even the election to make these decisions. That's pretty phenomenal. I think this is where the legislature needs to rectify this kind of imbalance, and it's very, very important. And one thing that's really, really important as well, that just because you can doesn't mean you should. And so when you've got this kind of imbalance of power, because you can, and then in this situation, I think the legislature really needs to weigh in and rectify the imbalance of power And for sure, need to remember that the property owners who pay those taxes have probably a greater stake in this whole thing than anybody else, and they should definitely have an opportunity to weigh in on this matter. And sometimes even the other township, when you shift property taxes from a township and now those property taxes go to a city, that's a loss for the township. And so it has that impact, and in some cases, because townships are so small, this is a really big impact to a township where it may be in addition to the city. So I think this is a legislative issue. If you want to consider stakeholder work group officially, those kinds of things could belong in my state government committee. Be glad to consider that and take input from that. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for an opportunity to give those additional comments.
Thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer. Senator Anderson, any closing comments?
Well, thank you, John. Thank you, members, for being diligent and wanting to hear more about the issue of annexation. I really think, and I concur with Senator Newman about property rights. This is a property rights issue, and it basically, from dealing with it back early in the late 1990s, we were talking about constitutional the rights of personal property rights, and where do they fall in line with the Constitution? And it basically, to me, is a major hurdle that faces this state, I'm sure other states, but this state for sure for so long with the issue of annexation. And I appreciate the comments and the input that was brought to the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing us to have the bill heard.
Thank you. And again, I want to thank everyone, again, as an informational hearing. We've had discussions, and the work group was a discussion as well. Senator Weaver, do you have something?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt your close
Nope,
there.
go ahead.
But
Make sure you get all
Senator
the comments.
Kiffmeyer, as a chair of government are you looking at a work group that you would put in there, or you don't necessarily need legislation, I guess, if chairs agree to it, but just wondering what the follow-up might be.
Senator Kiffmeyer, you want to respond?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. It seems that it'd be a valid situation to make an effort to maybe form a stakeholder group and to do some interim work on this, at least give an opportunity to continue this discussion. But probably if the League of Minnesota Cities are going to continue to take the position that we like it the way it is and we're not going to change, we're not going to support any change to their powers, then it makes a difference. But I'm certainly willing to do the legislative work of drafting language for a stakeholder work group.
Thank you. Other comments? Again, so Senator Kiffmeyer can work on that. We can also possibly have some hearings in the interim as far as a work group. I'm not sure how that will work because we have, I think, a third of us are going to turn over in this upcoming interim. So we're going to have a whole different group of people coming on next year. So for a work group to do a lot of work and then have a third of the people gone, to me sounds a little bit counterproductive. And I don't think anybody really wanted to tackle it this year. When I first became chair of local gov, we had some group meetings. And from what I've been told, the history of it is the issues that we had before even got worse when we started to talk about some possibilities of getting some things solved and some, as I call, low-hanging fruit. And it actually expanded. So it got more difficult, some of the issues we see. So if we can get a hearing together sometime in the interim or a work group, I would be happy to do that. But again, I think Senator Kiffmeyer hit it well, that we have to have some discussion for both parties to see if they'd like to make some changes. So with that, thank you again, everybody, for being here for an informational hearing today. With no other items on the agenda, we are hereby adjourned. And I got to get to taxes.